Hello, and welcome everyone to this mini MOOC on assumptions we make mostly implicitly in research and how we can perhaps not get misled by them. My name is Matti Heino. You will find the slides in this website here, and in the slides, when you download those, you can also follow all the links to the additional material and papers I have provided. So let's get started. In social sciences, as in all research, we make some assumptions, and our job, so to say, is to actually figure out which assumptions we can make in order to still retain the most important parts of what the reality of the phenomenon we are studying is. And in complex systems, these are sometimes very implicit and very strange assumptions we make because we're usually trying to apply the methods we are using for complicated systems into studying the complex systems, which can be which can be some like people, societies, or um, perhaps ecologies or something like that, where unlike in complicated systems, which you can see on the right here, the causal relations are not transparent and there are many things going on which usually violate the assumptions of the standard models we use. But in order to navigate the world, we need to make some simplifying assumptions because otherwise we wouldn't be able to walk from one room to the next without losing our minds. And I will present some of these in a hierarchical fashion. So what we first do is we draw boundaries between things. So we consider that my mind is different from your mind, and I am different from my environment, for example. And there's a visualization going on the severity in the right. And then next we classify these elements into types. So we consider that people are like people and rabbits are like rabbits, and maybe societies are like societies, and both are different. All of these are different from doors and door frames, for example. And next we consider that these structures of the mind or structures of our environment, that they are unchanging. So we don't need to take that the change in those structures into account. And there are two sub categories here. So we can consider that all events can happen, or that only the things fluctuate towards an equilibrium. And finally, we can consider processes as unchanging, so the relationships between components, that those will stay the same, and also that the components are identical and won't change in time. So today I will speak particularly about these two assumptions, namely stationarity and ergodicity. I will start with ergodicity. So an ergodic system is one where you can measure one person 1,000 times or measure 1,000 people one time and get exactly the same results. And this is an assumption that was posited by the wise men in the 17th century, where we needed to make the mathematics a bit easier to handle and finish the calculations before everyone is dead. So this was a simplifying assumption that has kind of stuck with us ever since. And this has now been studied in psychology quite a bit. Well, there was this one study where they had several different variables and data sets, and they looked at different variables and how those, or correlations and how those behaved within individuals and then also between individuals. And what they found out was that the uncertainty that we see when we look at between individual data is much lower than the uncertainty we see when we look at within individual data. So basically, this relates to many different phenomena. When you look at something within an individual, it fluctuates wildly, but when you look at the phenomenon in between individual data, it doesn't. It seems much more stable. So, for example, we have seen the big five personality uh, factors, and when those are looked at in within person level, you sometimes see uh, three factors, sometimes maybe one factor, and sometimes a person can have two factors at one point of their life, and the structure of their personality can show four factors at another point. So we can't really be making these overarching um, statements about what a person's personality is from what we know about between individual data. This also relates to the assumption of stationarity. So here's this is an example from self-determination theory, but it doesn't really matter what the variables are. You can posit your own variables of interest here. So we expect to see, and what we usually see is that autonomy, relatedness, and competence, they all correlate positively, although this has not been studied a lot on how they, which leads to which. But this is usually what we expect to see. And this is a participant in our study where we study fluctuations of work motivation. And so this participant actually shows that there are no relationships in time, um, although autonomy predicts autonomy at the next time point, and same with relatedness. So those predict themselves, but there are no links between these. And this is, of course, a bit puzzling until we realize that we have made an average of some 20 weeks of data collection. And when we actually start looking at when we use a time varying model and we let the relationships, we tell the model that the relationships can actually change across time. Here's what we see. So during the first week, there's a lot of things going on in the dynamic. In week 10, there are it almost looks like the average model, and in week 17 we see a different dynamic. So basically, both the within person average relationships as well as the between individual or theoretical relationships are wrong for this person. So if we want to make an intervention, we need to actually consider what is the fluctuation of these relationships across time. And here's the source if you want to fit these models for yourself. So, in summary, going back to the assumptions, we always need to, of course, first make the assumptions, but then try to get rid of as many as we can. And if we can't get rid of the assumptions, at least consider what would happen if I was wrong about this. So, what would be the implications to my patients or my company or whatever my research has an impact upon if we actually were wrong about the assumptions we're making. And we often can't do this with a single research, but for example, we're in our research we are combining qualitative methods, qualitative interviews with the quantitative ecological momentary assessment data, but we also could be doing, for example, ethnographical research, having a person in the company observing the individuals and so forth. So thank you for listening. Here's a quick summary, and on the last point, always look also forward. So here are two papers in the last slide of the slide deck, which are really very curious when we think about how research is commonly conducted. So I encourage you to check those papers out, as well as the other links if you get interested in some of the stuff I have presented here. And that's all for me today, and take good care of your assumptions. Thanks.